People think wealth begins in a bank account. It doesn't. Wealth begins in private, in silence, in the moments nobody applauds, in the decisions nobody sees, in the thoughts a person entertains when the room is empty, the phone is face down, and there is no audience left to impress. That is where rich thinking is born, not in luxury, not in status, not in social media clips pretending to be success, but in invisible habits, invisible standards, invisible discipline. Because the truth is simple. The way a person thinks when nobody is watching eventually becomes the life everybody watches later. And in this audiobook, The Rich Way of Thinking. Think when no one is watching, you're going to enter the hidden psychology behind people who quietly build power while the world stays distracted. Not financial tricks, not fantasy, not motivational noise. This is about mental architecture, the internal operating system that shapes decisions, relationships, money, discipline, and emotional control long before visible success appears. You are about to learn why some people stay trapped in cycles for decades, while others slowly build lives that seem impossible from the outside. And before we go deeper, hear this clearly. This audiobook is educational and transformational in nature. It is not financial advice. It is psychological awareness. Because money rarely changes a person. It reveals the person they already became in private. That is the difference. Most people think the rich have better opportunities, but often they simply protect their attention better. They think differently during ordinary moments. They use boredom differently, pressure differently, loneliness differently, time differently, failure differently. While most people are reacting, they are observing. While most people are announcing, they are building. While most people are addicted to being seen, they are addicted to becoming. And that changes everything. There is a sentence that unsettles people when they first hear it. Your future is hidden inside your invisible routines, not your goals, not your wishes, not your speeches, your routines. What you repeat quietly becomes your identity loudly. That is why this audiobook matters, because we are living in a world where appearances have become more valuable than substance. People rent lifestyles to look successful. They borrow money to impress strangers. They chase attention while neglecting discipline. And slowly, without realizing it, they train themselves to value performance over progress. But wealthy thinkers understand something dangerous. Attention is expensive. Distraction is expensive. Emotional chaos is expensive. Every unnecessary argument costs focus. Every hour scrolling costs creative energy. Every impulsive decision steals momentum from your future. The rich are not simply protecting money. They are protecting mental clarity. That is the real asset. You can see it everywhere in modern life. One person wakes up and immediately reaches for notifications. Another wakes up and protects the first hour, like a sacred meeting with their future. One person spends all day consuming opinions. Another spends all day strengthening their ability to think independently. One person needs constant validation to stay motivated. Another continues building even when nobody notices. Years later, people call one lucky. They call the other average, but they never saw the private thinking patterns that created both outcomes. That is why this audiobook is not about becoming obsessed with money. It is about becoming someone who can handle power without destroying themselves. Someone calm under pressure, focused under temptation, disciplined without applause, because if you cannot control yourself privately, success publicly will eventually expose you. Listen carefully to this. Poor thinking is expensive, not poor circumstances, poor thinking. A distracted mind creates expensive mistakes. An emotional mind destroys opportunities. An impulsive mind sabotages long-term freedom for short-term comfort. And most people never notice this because society trains reaction instead of reflection. Everything is engineered to steal your attention now. Algorithms, notifications, trends, outrage, endless stimulation. The modern world profits from distracted people because distracted people rarely build anything meaningful. They consume, react, compare, repeat. Meanwhile, the people quietly building wealth often look boring from the outside. They leave parties early. They think before speaking. They disappear for periods of growth. They read while others scroll. They build skills while others build appearances. And eventually, the gap becomes enormous. Not overnight. That is the illusion social media sells. Real wealth psychology compounds quietly, like drops carving stone, like roots growing beneath concrete before a tree breaks through the surface. You do not see the process at first, you only see the outcome later. And that is why many people misunderstand success completely. They see the result without respecting the invisible years behind it. But in this audiobook, we are going underneath the surface. We are entering the private world of disciplined thinking. The hidden conversation successful people have with themselves. The emotional standards they refuse to lower. The mental habits that allow them to stay steady while others collapse under pressure. Here is the roadmap for this journey. You will learn why rich thinkers protect solitude, why emotional control creates financial control, why silence is often more powerful than announcing plans, why wealthy people think in decades while most think in weekends, why attention is becoming more valuable than money in 2025, why self-respect changes income, why the ability to delay pleasure is one of the greatest predictors of future freedom. And most importantly, you will learn how to build an internal world so strong that external chaos no longer controls your direction. Because that is the real flex in modern life, not looking rich. Thinking clearly while the world loses focus. If that line hit something inside you, remember it. Thinking clearly while the world loses focus. That single ability can change an entire life. And if this audiobook resonates with you at any point, leave a comment with the sentence that hits you hardest. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. Sometimes writing a truth down is the first moment you actually confront it. Now, before we begin Chapter 1, there is one more truth you need to hear. The rich are not simply people with more money. Some wealthy people are emotionally bankrupt. Some millionaires are mentally weak. Some successful people are prisoners of their own impulses. So, when we speak about rich thinking, we are speaking about a deeper form of wealth. Mental wealth, emotional wealth, strategic wealth. The kind of inner stability that allows a person to create opportunities repeatedly instead of getting lucky once. Because anyone can win temporarily, but only disciplined minds can sustain freedom. And that journey begins somewhere very few people are willing to look. Alone, late at night, with no applause, with no camera, with no validation, just a human being confronting their own habits honestly. That is where rich thinking starts. And Chapter 1 begins with a dangerous question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What do you do when nobody is watching you anymore? Chapter 1. What you repeat in private becomes your identity in public. The richest thoughts are rarely loud. They do not arrive with fireworks. They do not announce themselves. Most of the time, they sound small, almost invisible. A decision to wake up earlier without posting about it. A choice to stay calm during an insult instead of reacting emotionally. A quiet refusal to waste money trying to impress people who are secretly distracted themselves. That is how powerful lives begin. Quietly. Most people are waiting for a breakthrough moment, but wealthy thinkers understand something deeper. Your life changes through repetition before it changes through results. That means the person you become is being shaped long before the evidence appears. And this is where most people lose, not because they are incapable, because they underestimate the importance of invisible behavior. They think the small moments do not matter. But they do. The way you speak to yourself when you fail matters. The way you use lonely evenings matters. The way you behave when nobody can reward you matters. Because character is not created under observation. It is revealed there. Real character is built when nobody is looking. There is a man sitting alone in a small apartment tonight. No applause, no recognition, no guarantee anything will work. But he is studying anyway, building anyway, learning anyway. And somewhere else, another person with more talent, more connections, more opportunity is wasting their future trying to look successful online. Years later, people will say one was disciplined. They will say the other lost potential. But the truth started much earlier. It started in private habits. You see, poor thinking often looks comfortable in the beginning. That is why it spreads so easily. Sleeping in feels harmless. Avoiding hard conversations feels harmless. Buying things emotionally feels harmless. Scrolling for hours feels harmless. But repeated comfort becomes quiet destruction. And the dangerous part is this. You usually do not notice your life shrinking while it is happening. That is why awareness is power. Wealthy thinkers constantly observe themselves, not obsessively, not emotionally, strategically. They ask questions most people avoid. Why am I distracted right now? Why do I need validation? Why do I lose focus when things become difficult? Why do I abandon routines the moment emotions change? That self-awareness becomes leverage. Because once you can observe your own patterns clearly, you stop being controlled by them. And this is where the divide between rich thinking and poor thinking becomes painfully visible. Poor thinking seeks comfort first. Rich thinking seeks alignment first. Comfort asks, what feels easy today? Alignment asks, what builds my future even if it feels uncomfortable now? That difference changes everything. A wealthy mindset understands delayed gratification emotionally, not just intellectually. Anybody can say patience matters. Very few people can actually practice it. Very few people can stay disciplined while results are invisible. Very few people can continue planting seeds during seasons where nothing seems to grow. But that is exactly what rich thinkers do, because they understand a truth most people never fully accept. Visible success is usually delayed private discipline, not luck, not magic, delayed discipline. And this becomes especially important in 2025 because modern life is engineered against patience. Everything is instant now. Instant entertainment, instant opinions, instant purchases, instant stimulation. People cannot sit quietly for 10 minutes without checking something, and when a mind loses its ability to sit still, it loses its ability to build deeply. Think about that carefully. A distracted mind struggles to create meaningful wealth because wealth often requires long periods of invisible focus. Building skills takes time. Building trust takes time. Building businesses takes time. Building emotional stability takes time. But people addicted to immediacy abandon the process too early. That is why emotional control is becoming one of the most valuable assets on earth. Not intelligence alone. Control. The ability to stay steady. While emotions try to sabotage long-term vision, a person who can control impulses already has an unfair advantage in modern society. Because most people cannot. Most people are emotionally reactive. They spend money emotionally, speak emotionally, quit emotionally, enter relationships emotionally, destroy opportunities emotionally, then blame circumstances afterward. But rich thinkers train themselves differently. They pause before reacting, they think before speaking, they observe before deciding. And this creates a kind of calm power that becomes impossible to ignore over time. You can feel it when you meet someone like this. They are present, grounded, not desperate for attention, not rushing to prove themselves. There is a quiet certainty about them, and that certainty was built privately. One disciplined decision at a time. There is another truth nobody talks about enough. The rich often think slower emotionally, but faster strategically, meaning they do not let emotions rush important decisions. Most people panic under pressure. Wealthy thinkers prepare under pressure. Most people collapse into fear during uncertainty. Wealthy thinkers look for positioning during uncertainty, and that mindset difference changes outcomes dramatically over years. During difficult seasons, average thinking asks, "How do I escape discomfort?" Rich thinking asks, "What is this season trying to teach me?" Because every difficult period contains information. Failure contains information. Embarrassment contains information. Loss contains information. And emotionally intelligent people extract lessons instead of only pain. That is why two people can experience the same setback and leave completely different. One becomes bitter. One becomes sharper. One loses faith in themselves. One develops resilience. One uses pain as an excuse. One uses pain as training. And eventually, their lives separate completely. The hidden truth is that suffering alone does not create growth. Reflection creates growth. Awareness creates growth. Honest self-correction creates growth. That is why wealthy thinkers spend time alone intentionally, not because they hate people, because solitude reveals patterns noise hides. When you sit quietly long enough, you begin hearing truths distractions were covering. You realize how much energy anxiety steals. You realize how many purchases were emotional. You realize how many conversations drained your focus. You realize how often you betrayed your own standards to fit in. And at first, that awareness hurts. But eventually it becomes freedom. Because once you see clearly, you can change clearly. This is why some of the most powerful transformations happen in silence. Not on stages, not online. Alone. A person deciding they are tired of being controlled by impulses. A person choosing discipline over distraction repeatedly. A person rebuilding self-respect quietly. That process changes everything. Because confidence is not built through motivational quotes. Confidence is built through evidence. Keeping promises to yourself. Waking up when you said you would. Finishing what you started. Controlling emotions during difficult moments. That creates internal trust. And internal trust creates a powerful kind of confidence money alone can never buy. Listen carefully. The rich do not only invest money differently, they invest attention differently. That may become the defining advantage of this decade. Attention. Where your focus goes, your future follows. If your attention belongs to distractions, your life slowly fragments. If your attention belongs to growth, your life compounds. That is why wealthy thinkers guard their minds aggressively. They understand that every environment is training them into something. Every conversation, every habit, every repeated thought, every digital input, everything shapes identity. So they become intentional about what enters their mind. Because eventually, your mind becomes your reality filter. If your thinking is weak, opportunities look impossible. If your thinking is disciplined, obstacles become strategy problems instead of emotional catastrophes. That is the power of mental conditioning. And this brings us to one of the most uncomfortable truths in the entire audiobook. Many people secretly sabotage themselves because chaos feels familiar. Read that again internally. Chaos feels familiar. Some people grew up surrounded by instability, drama, emotional unpredictability, financial stress. So when life finally becomes calm, they unconsciously recreate chaos because peace feels unfamiliar. That is why self-awareness matters so deeply. You cannot build wealth sustainably while remaining addicted to emotional disorder. At some point, you must learn stillness. You must learn emotional regulation. You must learn to stop turning temporary feelings into permanent decisions. And wealthy thinkers understand this deeply. They know emotions are temporary weather patterns, not leadership systems. Imagine making every financial decision based on temporary emotions. Imagine building relationships based only on emotional highs. Imagine quitting every goal whenever motivation disappears. That is how unstable lives are created. Rich thinking is stable thinking, not emotionless. Stable. There is a difference. Stable people still feel fear. They simply do not worship it. Stable people still feel doubt. They simply continue moving intelligently anyway. Stable people still experience pain. They simply refuse to let pain become identity. That mindset creates momentum, and momentum changes lives faster than intensity ever will, because intensity burns hot. Consistency burns long. If this is resonating with you right now, take this personally, not emotionally, practically. Ask yourself honestly, what private habits are shaping my future right now? What repeated behaviors are quietly creating the life I claim I do not want? And more importantly, what would happen if I became disciplined when nobody was watching me? Because that question changes everything. And in the next chapter, we are going deeper into one of the quietest forms of power on earth, the ability to stay silent while building something extraordinary. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. Build quietly until your results speak for you. There is a strange addiction in modern life. People want to be seen building more than they want to actually build. They announce goals too early, celebrate plans too early, expose dreams before discipline has protected them. And then they wonder why motivation disappears. But rich thinkers understand a dangerous psychological truth. The moment you receive applause for something you have not earned yet, your brain often relaxes before the work is complete. That is why silence is power. Silence protects momentum. Silence protects focus. Silence protects unfinished vision from unnecessary opinions. And the people who truly build extraordinary lives usually disappear for periods of time, not because they are lost, because they are constructing something internally, a new mindset, a new standard, a new identity. The world only sees the return. It rarely sees the rebuilding. Most people cannot stay quiet because silence forces confrontation. When distractions disappear, you finally hear your own thoughts clearly. Your excuses become louder. Your insecurities become visible. Your inconsistencies become undeniable. And many people would rather stay entertained than face themselves honestly. That is why constant noise has become normal. People fear stillness because stillness reveals truth. But wealthy thinkers train themselves to sit in that silence because silence sharpens awareness, and awareness sharpens decisions. Think about how rare deep focus has become now. A person sits down to work and checks their phone every 4 minutes. They open a laptop and immediately drift into notifications. They try to read while simultaneously consuming endless stimulation. And then they wonder why their life feels mentally scattered. Attention fragmentation creates identity fragmentation. A distracted life eventually becomes a disconnected life. Disconnected from goals, disconnected from purpose, disconnected from inner clarity. But rich thinkers know something powerful. The ability to focus deeply is becoming economic power. In a distracted world, concentration is leverage. The person who can sit with one mission for years without constant validation becomes dangerous. Because most people quit emotionally long before results appear. That is why silence matters. Silence builds endurance. Silence strengthens internal motivation. Silence teaches you how to continue without applause. And that skill alone separates builders from performers. A performer needs attention to continue. A builder needs vision. There is a massive difference. Performers optimize perception. Builders optimize reality. Performers ask, how does this look? Builders ask, how does this compound? That one mindset shift changes financial futures, relationships, health, and emotional stability. Because wealthy thinkers are obsessed with compounding. Not only financially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They understand that tiny repeated actions become massive outcomes over time. A single disciplined hour repeated daily changes a person. A single emotional impulse repeated daily destroys one. A single habit compounds into identity. That is why rich thinkers respect small behaviors. Small lateness becomes bigger inconsistency. Small dishonesty becomes bigger instability. Small distractions become larger self-sabotage. Everything scales eventually, and this is exactly why they guard their private life carefully, not from fear, from strategy. Because energy leaks destroy momentum. Every unnecessary argument drains cognitive strength. Every toxic environment weakens emotional clarity. Every relationship built on performance instead of truth slowly fractures identity. And the wealthy mindset values energy like currency, because energy creates execution. Execution creates outcomes. Outcomes create freedom. Most people think burnout only comes from working too hard. That is incomplete. Many people are exhausted because they are emotionally scattered. Too much comparison, too much noise, too much performance, too much trying to maintain an image instead of building substance. And secretly, it drains them. Look at modern culture carefully. People document workouts more than they train, document business ideas more than they execute, document goals more than they endure. And slowly, performance replaces progress. But the rich way of thinking is different. They understand the most important work often looks unimpressive in the beginning. Reading quietly, learning skills quietly, improving communication quietly, controlling emotions quietly, studying markets quietly, developing discipline quietly. These actions do not receive instant applause, but over years they create extraordinary lives. That is why patience becomes emotional strength, because without patience, people sabotage compounding. They quit too early, switch paths too early, abandon routines too early. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can do in 1 month and underestimate what disciplined consistency can do in 5 years. Wealthy thinkers understand time differently. Average thinking wants immediate proof. Rich thinking understands delayed payoff. Imagine planting a tree and digging it up every week to check if roots are growing. That is how most people treat goals. They interrupt their own progress constantly, seeking reassurance, seeking immediate outcomes, seeking external validation. Meanwhile, disciplined people stay focused long enough for roots to deepen, and eventually results become undeniable. But before results become visible, identity must change privately first. That is the hidden process nobody celebrates. The lonely mornings, the disciplined evenings, the repeated self-correction, the emotional restraint, the invisible effort. And this brings us to another truth. Successful people understand deeply. You cannot constantly consume and expect to create powerfully. Consumption without reflection creates mental obesity. Too many opinions, too much stimulation, too little execution. The modern person knows more motivational quotes than practical habits, and that is dangerous. Knowledge without implementation becomes another form of entertainment. Rich thinkers avoid this trap. They apply, they simplify, they execute, even imperfectly, because movement creates clarity faster than overthinking ever will. One of the biggest lies people tell themselves is, I need more time to prepare. Sometimes preparation is wisdom, but often preparation is disguised fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of imperfection. So people stay almost ready for years. But wealthy thinkers know confidence rarely appears before action. Confidence is built through repeated exposure to discomfort. You become stronger by entering difficult situations repeatedly, not by endlessly imagining them. That is why private courage matters, not public confidence. Private courage, the ability to continue despite uncertainty, the ability to act without guaranteed outcomes, the ability to trust long-term growth more than temporary comfort. That mindset changes careers, changes relationships, changes futures. There is a woman somewhere tonight studying after a 10-hour shift. Nobody sees her sacrifice. Nobody applauds her exhaustion. But she keeps learning, keeps growing, keeps refusing to let her current environment define her future permanently. That is rich thinking. There is a young man rejecting distractions while friends mock his discipline. He saves money quietly, builds skills quietly, learns emotional control quietly. Years later, people will call him lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it. Invisible repetition did. Always remember this. The world celebrates outcomes. Life rewards process. And process is usually lonely in the beginning. That loneliness breaks many people emotionally. They want immediate recognition, immediate proof, immediate certainty. But rich thinkers understand a principle average thinking resists deeply. Temporary isolation is often required for permanent transformation, not forever, but long enough to rebuild identity, long enough to strengthen discipline, long enough to become emotionally independent from constant validation. Because dependence on external approval creates fragile ambition. The moment criticism appears, motivation collapses. But internally driven people become resilient. They continue through misunderstanding, continue through silence, continue through invisible progress. And eventually, momentum compounds so heavily that results begin speaking for them. That is the stage everybody notices: the confidence, the financial growth, the opportunities, the calmness under pressure. But by then, the person was already transformed privately, long before public recognition arrived. And perhaps the most dangerous thing about rich thinking is this: once you truly change internally, average environments start feeling uncomfortable. Certain conversations drain you. Certain habits feel destructive. Certain people reveal how committed they are to staying stagnant, not because you became arrogant, because your standards evolved and growth changes tolerance. A disciplined mind eventually becomes allergic to constant chaos. You stop romanticizing dysfunction. You stop admiring loudness without substance. You stop confusing attention with importance. And you begin valuing peace differently, focus differently, time differently. That is maturity, not age, awareness. Because some people grow older without ever growing wiser. But people who reflect deeply evolve faster than their years. And one of the clearest signs a person is evolving is this: they become more intentional about where their energy goes. Because they finally understand something life teaches painfully. Everything costs something. Every distraction costs focus. Every impulse costs discipline. Every emotional overreaction costs clarity. Every year spent pretending costs identity. So wealthy thinkers become careful, not fearful. Careful. They stop giving energy away cheaply. And in the next chapter, we are going into one of the most misunderstood forms of wealth on earth: emotional control. Because the person who controls emotions under pressure controls outcomes most people lose impulsively. And that is where true power begins separating itself from appearance. Chapter 3, Emotional Control, is the hidden currency of power. Most people lose their future emotionally before they lose it financially. They react too fast, trust too quickly, quit too early, spend impulsively, speak recklessly. And then they spend years cleaning up decisions that lasted only a few emotional minutes. That is why emotional control is not just self-help advice. It is a wealth skill, a leadership skill, a survival skill. Because life will test your emotions constantly. Success tests them, failure tests them, relationships test them, money tests them, silence tests them, rejection tests them. And if emotions control your behavior every time pressure appears, consistency becomes impossible. Rich thinkers understand this deeply. They know emotions are real, but they also know emotions are temporary. And temporary feelings should never be allowed to create permanent destruction. Think about how many lives changed because someone could not pause for 10 seconds. One angry message, one emotional purchase, one impulsive decision, one uncontrolled reaction. Moments create consequences. That is why emotional discipline creates long-term freedom. The wealthy mindset is not cold. It is regulated. There is a difference. Cold people disconnect emotionally. Regulated people remain aware without becoming ruled by feelings. That distinction matters. because emotional suppression eventually explodes. But emotional mastery creates stability, and stability creates trust. People trust calm minds. Businesses trust calm minds. Teams trust calm minds. Opportunities flow toward people who remain composed under pressure because calmness signals strength, not weakness. Most people misunderstand calm people. They think calm means passive, but often calmness is controlled power, a disciplined mind refusing to waste energy emotionally. And this becomes more valuable every year because modern society rewards emotional impulsiveness publicly while punishing it privately. Online culture trains reaction, instant outrage, instant judgment, instant emotional expression. People post feelings faster than they process them. And slowly, emotional instability becomes normalized. But wealthy thinkers move differently. They slow down before major decisions. They think through consequences. They separate feelings from strategy. That alone creates enormous advantage. Imagine two people facing the same crisis. One panics immediately. The other breathes, observes, adjusts, responds carefully. Who makes better decisions? Who protects opportunities? Who maintains relationships? Who preserves momentum? The answer is obvious. Yet most people never train emotional control intentionally. They wait until life humiliates them enough to finally learn restraint. But emotionally intelligent people study themselves early. They notice patterns. They recognize triggers. They understand where emotions distort judgment. And instead of pretending emotions do not exist, they build systems to manage them intelligently. That is maturity. Not pretending to never feel anger, learning how not to become anger, not pretending fear disappears, learning how to move wisely despite fear, because courage is not emotional perfection. It is emotional leadership, and that changes everything. There is a hidden reason many people stay financially trapped. Emotional spending. They buy relief instead of building freedom. Stress becomes shopping. Sadness becomes consumption. Insecurity becomes luxury performance. And companies understand this psychology perfectly. Modern advertising rarely sells products anymore. It sells emotional identity, status, validation, escape, belonging. That is why emotionally unaware people become easy to manipulate. If someone else can control your emotional state consistently, they can often control your decisions. But rich thinkers resist emotional manipulation. Not because they are superior, because they are observant. They ask, why do I suddenly feel urgency? Why do I need this immediately? Am I buying value or emotion? That pause alone saves years of financial damage, and emotional control extends far beyond money. It shapes relationships deeply. Weak emotional control destroys communication. People say things they cannot take back, react before understanding, project pain onto people trying to help them. Then wonder why trust disappears. But disciplined thinkers understand something painful. Not every emotion deserves expression. Some emotions deserve examination first. That sentence alone can save marriages, businesses, friendships, and futures, because emotions are information, not commands. Read that again mentally. Emotions are information, not commands. Feeling anger does not mean attack. Feeling fear does not mean quit. Feeling insecurity does not mean compare yourself to strangers online for 3 hours. Emotionally wealthy people create space between feeling and reaction. And inside that space lives power, real power, not dominance, not loudness, choice. Because the ability to choose your response under pressure changes the direction of your entire life. There is a reason high-level leaders often appear composed during chaos. It is not because they feel nothing. It is because panic spreads. Calm spreads too. And people unconsciously follow emotional energy. That is why emotional leadership matters. The parent who stays calm during financial hardship stabilizes the home. The business owner who remains steady during uncertainty stabilizes the company. The friend who remains grounded during a crisis stabilizes relationships. Calmness creates clarity, and clarity creates solutions. But uncontrolled emotion creates confusion. This is why wealthy thinkers often protect their nervous system carefully. They sleep intentionally, exercise intentionally, limit unnecessary drama intentionally, because they know exhausted minds become emotionally reactive minds. And emotional reactivity destroys precision. Think about how many people sabotage progress simply because they are mentally overstimulated all the time. No rest, no reflection, no silence, constant dopamine, constant comparison, constant emotional stimulation. Then they wonder why focus disappears. The nervous system was never designed for endless digital chaos. That is why rich thinking often includes intentional disconnection. Quiet mornings, deep work, long walks, time away from noise. Not because it looks spiritual online, because clarity requires space, and clarity produces better decisions. The wealthy mindset values clarity more than excitement. Excitement feels powerful temporarily. Clarity builds power sustainably. That is why emotionally mature people stop chasing emotional highs constantly. They stop needing life to always feel exciting because they understand something average thinking resists deeply. Consistency is often boring before it becomes extraordinary. Going to the gym repeatedly is boring sometimes. Saving money consistently is boring sometimes. Studying daily is boring sometimes. Building quietly is boring sometimes. But boredom tolerated intelligently becomes freedom later. And emotional discipline is what allows people to continue through ordinary days. Most lives are not changed in dramatic moments. They are changed in repetitive ones. How you handle stress repeatedly matters. How you handle disappointment repeatedly matters. How you handle temptation repeatedly matters. Your repeated emotional patterns become your future. That is why self-awareness matters so much. You cannot master emotions you refuse to observe honestly. Many people think they have anger problems, but often they have unresolved pain problems. Some think they lack discipline, but often they lack emotional regulation. Some think they are unlucky, but they repeatedly destroy opportunities emotionally without recognizing the pattern. Awareness changes that. And wealthy thinkers cultivate awareness constantly, not self-hatred, self-observation, because honest observation creates transformation. Pretending creates stagnation. There is another hidden truth about emotional control. The stronger you become internally, the less easily offended you become externally. Because insecurity reacts faster than confidence. People desperate for validation feel attacked by everything. But grounded people conserve emotional energy carefully. They do not fight every battle. They do not explain themselves endlessly. They do not collapse every time criticism appears. And this creates a kind of quiet intimidation. A person who cannot be emotionally manipulated becomes difficult to control. That is true freedom, not money alone, internal stability. And perhaps one of the clearest signs someone is becoming mentally wealthy is this. They stop making emotional decisions during emotional moments. They wait, reflect, process. Then act strategically. That single habit can alter generations. Imagine if more people paused before ruining relationships, paused before quitting dreams, paused before spending emotionally, paused before reacting publicly. Lives would transform, because many disasters are emotional storms mistaken for truth, and storms always feel permanent while you are inside them. But disciplined minds remember, this feeling will pass, my decisions will remain. That awareness creates restraint, and restraint creates long-term power. If this chapter resonates with you, write this sentence somewhere private after listening. My emotions deserve respect, but they do not deserve control. Read it again during difficult seasons, because emotional mastery is not built during peaceful moments. It is built during pressure. And the next chapter is about another form of invisible discipline wealthy thinkers protect fiercely: their relationship with time. Because rich thinkers do not merely spend time differently, they experience time differently. And that shift changes everything from focus to finances to identity itself. Dear viewer, we would really be grateful if you could share your ideas on how we can improve our videos in the comments. Thank you very much. Chapter 4. Rich thinkers treat time like a living asset. Poor thinking asks, how much time do I have? Rich thinking asks, what is my time becoming? That difference is massive, because time is not just something you spend. Time is something that shapes you while it passes. Every hour trains identity. Every routine reinforces direction. Every repeated action quietly votes for the person you're becoming. And most people never realize this until years disappear. That is the frightening part about time. It moves silently. You do not hear your potential leaving. You do not notice habits compounding immediately. You do not wake up one morning suddenly ruined. It happens slowly, one distracted year at a time, one avoided responsibility at a time, one repeated excuse at a time. And because destruction is gradual, people normalize it. They say things like, I'm just tired. I'll start next month. I need more motivation. Life's been busy. But underneath those sentences is often something deeper: uncontrolled drift. And drift is dangerous because it feels harmless while stealing decades. Wealthy thinkers fear drift more than hard work, because hard work at least moves somewhere. Drift moves nowhere while pretending movement exists. Look at how many people stay busy without becoming effective. Endless activity, constant notifications, always occupied, but internally, no clarity, no long-term structure, no intentional direction. That is not productivity. That is scattered energy. And scattered energy creates scattered lives. Rich thinkers understand something most people avoid confronting. Not all movement is progress. Sometimes people move constantly because stopping would force them to face uncomfortable truths. Truths about wasted talent. Truths about procrastination. Truths about fear disguised as preparation. So they stay busy to avoid self-confrontation. But wealthy minds slow down enough to think strategically. They ask questions average thinking rarely asks. What deserves my best hours? What drains my mental energy? What habits are stealing my future quietly? Am I reacting to life or designing it? Those questions create awareness, and awareness changes time usage dramatically. Because once you realize your days are building your future automatically, you stop treating hours casually. You stop wasting entire evenings unconsciously. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop letting distractions own your attention completely. Instead, you become intentional. And intentional living creates compounding results. There is a hidden reason many wealthy thinkers wake up early. Not because mornings are magical, because mornings are less contaminated, fewer demands, fewer interruptions, fewer emotional inputs. The early hours often belong to the person before the world begins pulling at them. And rich thinkers protect those hours carefully. Reading, thinking, planning, training, building. Not because discipline feels exciting every morning, because clarity built early changes the quality of decisions all day. Meanwhile, most people begin mornings reactively. Phone first, notifications first, stress first, comparison first. And before the day even starts, their nervous system already belongs to external noise. That creates mental weakness over time, because the brain adapts to whatever patterns repeat. A reactive morning becomes a reactive life eventually. But intentional mornings create intentional identities, and identity always shapes destiny more than temporary motivation. This is why wealthy thinkers value routines, not because routines look impressive online, because routines reduce decision fatigue. Think about how exhausting inconsistency becomes. Sleeping randomly, eating randomly, working randomly, planning randomly, emotional chaos creates mental exhaustion. But structure protects energy, and protected energy creates better execution. Rich thinkers know something average thinking often ignores. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is protection. It protects future opportunities, protects health, protects finances, protects emotional stability, protects momentum. Without discipline, life becomes emotionally expensive. You pay for impulsiveness later, always. That is why wealthy people often seem repetitive. Consistent sleep, consistent habits, consistent focus, consistent standards, not because they lack personality, because they understand repetition creates mastery, and mastery creates leverage. There is another truth about time most people do not fully accept. Every yes costs something. Every commitment consumes life force. Every unnecessary obligation steals creative energy from something else. That is why mentally wealthy people become selective, not antisocial. Selective. They protect attention carefully because they understand modern life is designed to fragment it constantly. And fragmented attention weakens depth, weakens relationships, weakens thinking, weakens execution. You can see this everywhere now. People consume 10-second clips all day, then wonder why sitting with one difficult task feels unbearable. Their focus has been trained into fragmentation. And without deep focus, meaningful wealth becomes difficult to build. Because extraordinary outcomes usually require long periods of concentrated effort. A distracted mind struggles to produce extraordinary results consistently. That is why attention may become the greatest luxury of this decade. Pure attention, undivided focus, the ability to think deeply while others remain overstimulated. And rich thinkers train this ability intentionally. They spend time alone without stimulation sometimes. They read long-form ideas, reflect deeply, write thoughts down, sit with difficult questions instead of escaping immediately, because depth creates power. Surface-level living creates emotional weakness. There is a sentence that changes how many successful people experience life. Your calendar reveals your real priorities, not your intentions, not your speeches, your time allocation. Where time goes repeatedly, identity follows eventually. That truth is uncomfortable because many people claim they want transformation while giving their best hours to distraction, claim they want freedom while avoiding discipline, claim they want growth while protecting comfort constantly, and life responds accordingly, not emotionally, mathematically. Repeated patterns create repeated outcomes. That is why wealthy thinkers study patterns relentlessly, patterns in spending, patterns in focus, patterns in relationships, patterns in emotional reactions. Because once patterns become visible, change becomes possible. And this leads to another important truth. The rich often think in decades, while average thinking lives in emotional weekends. Most people optimize for temporary relief. Wealthy thinkers optimize for long-term freedom. One mindset asks, what feels good right now? The other asks, what builds the strongest future? That shift changes finances dramatically, health dramatically, relationships dramatically. Imagine choosing food based only on temporary craving, or relationships based only on emotional excitement, or spending based only on impulse. Short-term thinking destroys long-term peace. But rich thinkers understand delayed gratification emotionally. They are willing to endure temporary discomfort for permanent improvement, and that ability creates extraordinary separation over years. Because most people refuse to suffer strategically. They avoid difficult conversations, avoid discipline, avoid sacrifice, avoid temporary loneliness, avoid uncertainty. But avoidance compounds, too. Everything compounds. That is the hidden law shaping human lives. Attention compounds. Discipline compounds. Distraction compounds. Resentment compounds. Reading compounds. Savings compound. Character compounds. And eventually, what compounded privately becomes visible publicly. This is why rich thinkers become obsessed with trajectory instead of appearances. They ask, who am I becoming repeatedly? Because identity matters more than temporary image. A person pretending to be disciplined eventually collapses under pressure. But a truly disciplined person remains stable, even without recognition. That stability creates trust internally, and internal trust changes confidence permanently. There is another dangerous trap average thinking falls into constantly, waiting for perfect conditions, perfect timing, perfect certainty, perfect confidence. But rich thinkers know life rarely provides complete certainty before action. Most breakthroughs begin with incomplete clarity. A person starts before feeling fully ready, learns while moving, adjusts while building, grows while uncomfortable. That is how momentum forms. Action creates clarity faster than endless overthinking ever will, and time respects movement, not intention alone. This is why wealthy thinkers value execution heavily, because ideas without action are psychological entertainment. Potential without movement becomes regret eventually, and regret is heavy. Heavier than failure, failure teaches, regret haunts. That is why rich thinkers would rather attempt intelligently and learn than spend years wondering what might have happened. Because time never pauses for hesitation. It keeps moving, quietly, relentlessly, and one day people wake up shocked by how quickly life changed. But life did not change suddenly. Time compounded silently, just like habits, just like identity, just like thinking. If this chapter is hitting deeply, ask yourself honestly tonight, where is my time actually going? Not ideally, actually, because your answer reveals your current trajectory, and trajectories matter more than temporary moods. The next chapter goes even deeper into one of the most misunderstood truths about wealthy thinking. Why rich people protect solitude while average thinking fears it. Because the ability to be alone without becoming lonely may be one of the greatest indicators of future power. Chapter 5. Solitude is where rich thinking becomes clear. Most people are terrified of silence, not because silence is dangerous, because silence removes distractions. And once distractions disappear, truth becomes harder to avoid. That is why so many people keep noise around them constantly. Music during every quiet moment, notifications every few minutes, television while eating, scrolling before sleep, podcasts while walking, endless stimulation. Because stillness forces confrontation. You begin hearing your own thoughts clearly. You begin noticing emotional exhaustion. You begin realizing how much of your life has been reactive instead of intentional. And for many people, that realization feels uncomfortable. But wealthy thinkers learn something powerful early. Solitude is not punishment. It is calibration. It is where perspective sharpens, where emotional chaos settles, where real thinking begins. The richest ideas often arrive in quiet moments, not crowded ones, because deep thought requires space, and modern life is becoming increasingly hostile toward space. Everybody wants your attention. Applications compete for it. Companies monetize it. Algorithms study it. People demand it. And if you never protect your inner world intentionally, eventually your thoughts stop feeling like your own. You become a reflection of constant external influence, constant reaction, constant consumption. That is why solitude matters now more than ever. Not isolation forever. Intentional separation long enough to hear yourself again. There is a major difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels empty because you are disconnected from yourself. Solitude feels powerful because you reconnect with yourself. And wealthy thinkers build a healthy relationship with solitude because they understand something average thinking avoids. A person who cannot be alone often becomes emotionally dependent on distraction, dependent on validation, dependent on noise, dependent on other people's approval to feel valuable. But emotional dependence weakens decision-making. You begin choosing relationships from fear instead of alignment. You begin staying busy to avoid reflection. You begin confusing attention with connection. And slowly, identity becomes externally controlled. But solitude interrupts that pattern. In solitude, masks begin falling away. You notice what actually matters to you. You notice which goals are real and which ones were borrowed from social pressure. You notice how much energy comparison steals. You notice how often you betray your own standards just to feel accepted temporarily. And awareness changes everything. There is a reason many successful people intentionally disappear during growth seasons. Because transformation requires concentration. You cannot constantly perform for the world while simultaneously rebuilding yourself deeply. At some point, you need distance from noise, distance from expectations, distance from endless opinions, so you can think clearly again. This is where rich thinking separates itself sharply from average thinking. Average thinking fears missing out. Rich thinking fears wasting life unconsciously. That difference changes priorities dramatically. One person spends years chasing experiences to avoid emptiness. Another spends years building internal depth that eventually creates peace. And peace, real peace, is becoming rare, not comfort. Peace, the ability to sit quietly without needing constant stimulation. The ability to enjoy your own mind without escape. The ability to exist without performing. That is wealth too. In fact, many financially successful people remain internally poor because they never learned solitude. They became addicted to achievement, addicted to movement, addicted to validation. So even after reaching success, they still feel restless internally because external wins cannot replace internal clarity, and clarity usually develops in silence. Think about some of the clearest moments in your life. Many of them probably happened away from noise, late-night reflection, long walks alone, quiet mornings, moments after heartbreak, moments after failure, moments where distractions disappeared long enough for truth to surface. That is the power of solitude. It reveals, and revelation creates transformation. There is another reason wealthy thinkers value solitude. It strengthens independent thought. Most people unknowingly absorb beliefs from their environment without questioning them deeply. Family beliefs, social beliefs, cultural beliefs, online narratives, financial habits, relationship patterns. And if they never spend time alone thinking critically, they repeat inherited limitations automatically. But solitude creates examination. Do I actually believe this? Why do I fear failure so much? Why do I keep repeating this behavior? Whose approval am I still chasing? Those questions create freedom because examined thinking becomes intentional thinking. And intentional thinking builds powerful lives. Unexamined thinking creates unconscious repetition. That is why some people live the same emotional year 20 times and call it experience. But experience alone does not create wisdom. Reflection creates wisdom. A person can suffer repeatedly without learning anything if they never pause long enough to reflect honestly. Rich thinkers reflect constantly, not obsessively, strategically. They review decisions, review emotions, review mistakes, not to shame themselves, to improve themselves. That is a major distinction. Emotionally immature people avoid self-reflection because accountability feels painful. Emotionally intelligent people seek reflection because growth matters more than ego. And ego is dangerous, especially modern ego. The need to appear successful before becoming successful. The need to look disciplined before developing discipline. The need to sound wise before building wisdom. But solitude exposes performative identity quickly, because when nobody is around, only truth remains, only habits remain, only discipline remains, only character remains. That can feel uncomfortable initially, but eventually it becomes empowering. Because once you stop performing, you finally begin building authentically. And authentic growth lasts longer than image management ever will. There is another hidden power solitude develops: emotional independence. The ability to remain grounded without constant reassurance. That matters deeply, because life will not always applaud your direction immediately. Sometimes growth looks invisible for long periods. Sometimes nobody understands your vision at first. Sometimes progress happens internally long before externally. And if your motivation depends entirely on recognition, you will quit too early. But solitude teaches self-validation. It teaches you how to continue quietly, how to trust process without immediate applause, how to keep building during invisible seasons. That is one of the rarest forms of strength now, especially in an attention economy where people feel forgotten if they are not constantly visible. But rich thinkers understand visibility is not the goal. Substance is. Because eventually, substance creates results visibility cannot fake forever. And this is why many wealthy people become careful about who they allow into their mental space. Not arrogant, protective. They understand energy spreads, mindset spread, emotional habits spread. Spend enough time around chronic negativity and your thinking shrinks. Spend enough time around emotionally reactive people, and chaos starts feeling normal. Spend enough time around ambition without integrity, and eventually emptiness follows success. Environment matters. Conversations matter. What enters your mind repeatedly matters. That is why solitude sometimes becomes necessary for reset, for recalibration, for remembering who you actually are beneath pressure and noise. There is a sentence that changes many lives once understood deeply. If you cannot enjoy your own company, you will eventually tolerate the wrong company. Read that slowly internally. Many people stay in destructive relationships, environments, and patterns simply because they fear being alone. But rich thinkers would rather endure temporary solitude than permanent self-betrayal. That takes courage, especially in a world obsessed with constant connection. But solitude develops standards. You stop tolerating conversations that drain your spirit. Stop chasing approval from emotionally unavailable people. Stop sacrificing long-term peace for temporary companionship. And eventually, your life becomes more intentional. Not smaller, cleaner, stronger, more aligned. Because solitude sharpens standards, and standards shape destiny. There is another important truth. Creative breakthroughs often require isolation, not forever, but long enough for uninterrupted thought. Most extraordinary ideas require uninterrupted concentration to mature, but constant distraction interrupts depth. That is why rich thinkers intentionally create thinking space. No phone, no stimulation, no performance, just reflection, just strategy, just honest confrontation with reality. And this ability becomes more valuable every year because the world is becoming noisier every day. The person who can still think clearly through chaos becomes powerful. The person who can hear intuition beneath noise becomes dangerous. The person who can remain emotionally stable in silence becomes free. Because eventually you realize something most people never fully understand. Silence is not empty. It is revealing. And in the next chapter, we are entering another hidden layer of wealthy psychology. Why rich thinkers become extremely careful about identity. Because your identity silently controls your habits, your standards, your relationships, and ultimately, your future. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 6. Your identity is quietly building your future. Most people try to change their life without changing their identity. That is why they keep restarting. Restarting diets, restarting discipline, restarting goals, restarting routines. Because behavior that conflicts with identity rarely lasts. You can force action temporarily, but eventually, people return to the version of themselves they believe they are. That is the hidden force controlling most lives. Identity, not motivation, not information. Identity. A person who still secretly identifies as lazy will sabotage discipline eventually. A person who identifies as unlucky will unconsciously expect failure. A person who identifies as emotionally broken will often recreate painful relationships repeatedly. Because identity acts like an invisible filter. It influences what feels normal, what feels deserved, what feels possible. And wealthy thinkers understand this deeply. That is why they protect identity carefully. They do not merely ask, "What do I want?" They ask, "Who do I need to become to sustain it? That question changes everything, because temporary success without internal transformation usually collapses. Money amplifies identity. Pressure exposes identity. Freedom reveals identity. If a person lacks emotional discipline before success, success often magnifies the chaos already inside them. That is why rich thinking focuses heavily on internal architecture, the habits, the standards, the self-image, the emotional patterns. Because external growth without internal growth creates instability, and instability eventually destroys what was built. Look carefully at people who constantly self-sabotage. Many times, opportunity was not the issue. Identity was. They received chances they secretly did not feel worthy of. They achieved progress they subconsciously feared maintaining, so they unconsciously returned to familiar patterns, familiar pain, familiar excuses, familiar chaos, because familiarity often feels safer than growth, even when familiarity is destructive. That is one of the hardest truths about human psychology. People do not always choose what is best. Often they choose what feels familiar. And rich thinkers intentionally retrain familiarity. They normalize discipline, normalize focus, normalize patience, normalize emotional control, normalize self-respect. That repetition slowly rewires identity until discipline no longer feels forced. It feels natural. This is why wealthy thinkers pay attention to self-talk, because language reinforces identity constantly. Listen carefully to how many people speak about themselves. I'm terrible with money. I've always been lazy. I can never stay consistent. I'm just an anxious person. Repeated language becomes psychological instruction. The mind listens, and eventually behavior aligns with repeated identity statements. But disciplined thinkers interrupt destructive narratives consciously, not through fake positivity, through intentional redefinition. Instead of, I'm trying to become disciplined, they begin thinking, I am becoming someone who keeps promises to myself. That is identity-based growth. And identity-based growth lasts longer because it changes self-perception itself. There is another dangerous modern trap. People building identities around appearances instead of substance. Looking productive instead of becoming productive. Looking wealthy instead of building wealth. Looking confident instead of building confidence. But appearance-based identity is fragile because it depends on external validation to survive. The moment recognition disappears, insecurity returns, but substance-based identity becomes stable because it is built through evidence, real habits, real growth, real discipline, real self-respect. That kind of confidence cannot be easily shaken because it was earned privately, one difficult workout at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one disciplined morning at a time, one emotional victory at a time. That is how identity evolves, quietly, repeatedly, internally first, and this process is uncomfortable because growth often requires grieving old versions of yourself. Old habits, old environments, old excuses, old coping mechanisms, old identities built around pain. Some people have spent years identifying with struggle, so when peace begins entering their life, they unconsciously resist it. Because peace feels unfamiliar. That is why awareness matters so deeply. Without awareness, people repeat unconscious cycles endlessly. But rich thinkers observe patterns honestly. They ask, what part of me keeps recreating this outcome? Not from shame, from responsibility. Because responsibility creates power. Blame creates stagnation. And this is where average thinking often becomes trapped. Blaming circumstances endlessly, blaming the economy, blaming parents, blaming luck, blaming timing. Now listen carefully. Some people absolutely begin life with enormous disadvantages. Pain is real, trauma is real, unfairness is real. But wealthy thinking asks a different question. What can I control from here? Because dwelling forever on what cannot be changed drains energy from what still can. And energy matters, focus matters, direction matters, identity matters. A person who constantly sees themselves as powerless behaves differently than someone rebuilding internal authority slowly. That is why rich thinkers become obsessed with keeping promises to themselves. Tiny promises: wake up on time, read daily, save consistently, exercise regularly, not because the actions themselves are magical. Because every completed promise strengthens identity. Every completed promise says, I trust myself. And self-trust changes human behavior dramatically. People with strong self-trust move differently. They hesitate less, fear rejection less, recover from failure faster, because internally they know, I can rely on myself. That is wealth too. In fact, self-trust may be one of the most valuable assets a human being can build. Without it, opportunities feel terrifying. With it, uncertainty becomes manageable. There is another truth successful people understand deeply. Identity is shaped by environment repeatedly. Spend years around mediocrity, and excellence begins feeling extreme. Spend years around negativity and optimism feels unrealistic. Spend years around emotionally reactive people, and calmness feels strange. Environment programs standards slowly. That is why rich thinkers become intentional about proximity. Not because they think they are better than others, because they understand influence is real. Energy spreads, mindset spread, ambition spreads. Fear spreads too. And if you are not intentional about what surrounds you, eventually your environment shapes your identity by default. This includes digital environments now, social media feeds, content consumption, online conversations. Everything entering your mind repeatedly becomes psychological conditioning. That is why wealthy thinkers protect mental input carefully, because eventually information becomes identity, and identity becomes behavior. There is another hidden layer to this. Identity affects financial decisions massively. A person who sees themselves as temporary and unstable spends differently than someone building a future. A person seeking validation buys differently than someone seeking freedom. A person trying to impress strangers manages money differently than someone investing in long-term peace. Identity silently drives financial behavior. That is why two people can earn the same income and build completely different lives. One builds assets quietly. The other builds appearances loudly. One thinks long-term. The other thinks emotionally. One builds freedom. The other builds performance. And eventually outcomes reveal the thinking beneath them. This is why wealthy thinkers rarely obsess over looking rich immediately. They are more interested in becoming financially unshakable eventually. That requires patience, discipline, identity evolution. And identity evolution is invisible before it becomes visible. There is a powerful question wealthy thinkers ask themselves often. What would the strongest version of me do consistently? Not perfectly, consistently, because perfection is ego. Consistency is transformation. Perfect people do not exist. Disciplined people do. Self-aware people do. Resilient people do. And resilience matters more than perfection ever will. Life will knock everyone down eventually. The difference is identity. Some people interpret failure as proof they are weak. Others interpret failure as proof they are growing. Same event, different identity, different future. This is why rich thinking becomes so powerful. It changes interpretation itself, and interpretation shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Outcomes reinforce identity. That cycle either traps people or transforms them. You choose which direction it moves, quietly, daily, repeatedly. If this chapter is speaking directly to you, reflect honestly tonight. Who have I been repeatedly becoming? Not who do I pretend to be, not who do I wish I was. Who am I becoming through my habits, my emotions, my standards, and my routines? Because that answer reveals your trajectory more honestly than dreams ever will. And in the next chapter, we are entering one of the most powerful hidden principles wealthy thinkers understand. Why discipline is actually a form of self-respect, and why people who cannot control themselves eventually become controlled by everything else. Chapter 7. Discipline is the highest form of self-respect. Most people think discipline is punishment, something restrictive, something painful, something only serious people do. But wealthy thinkers see discipline differently. They see discipline as protection, protection from self-destruction, protection from emotional impulses, protection from wasted potential. Because eventually, the person who cannot control themselves becomes controlled by everything else, controlled by cravings, controlled by distractions, controlled by moods, controlled by other people's opinions, controlled by comfort and comfort. Comfort is dangerous when it becomes your highest priority. There is nothing wrong with rest, nothing wrong with peace, nothing wrong with enjoyment. But when comfort becomes the main goal of life, growth quietly dies. Because growth requires friction, requires effort, requires temporary discomfort. Every meaningful transformation asks something difficult from you first. And most people spend their lives negotiating with difficulty instead of facing it directly. That negotiation becomes expensive, not immediately. Years later. A person avoids discipline for years and then wonders why confidence disappeared, why health declined, why opportunities feel smaller, why life feels heavy. But the weight did not appear overnight. Undisciplined decisions accumulated silently. That is always how it happens. Quietly, repeatedly, incrementally. Wealthy thinkers understand this deeply. So they stop asking, what feels easiest right now? And start asking, what future am I reinforcing with this choice? That question changes daily behavior dramatically. Suddenly, small actions matter again, because they realize discipline is not about one dramatic moment. It is about repeated alignment. One decision at a time, one promise kept at a time, one distraction resisted at a time. That is how strong identities form, not through motivation. Through repetition, there is a hidden connection between discipline and self-worth most people never fully recognize. People who deeply respect themselves behave differently privately. They protect sleep, protect focus, protect health, protect standards, not perfectly, intentionally. Because self-respect creates boundaries, and boundaries protect future peace. But many people secretly lack self-respect. So they tolerate chaos, tolerate toxic environments, tolerate financial recklessness, tolerate destructive habits, tolerate emotional instability. And eventually, that tolerance becomes identity. That is why discipline is emotional, not just practical. A disciplined person is constantly sending themselves one message: my future matters. That message compounds psychologically. Every workout says it. Every focused hour says it. Every unnecessary distraction resisted says it. Every emotionally controlled response says it. And over time, identity strengthens. Self-trust strengthens. Confidence strengthens. Because confidence is not built by talking to yourself positively while ignoring your own behavior. Confidence is built when your actions and your values begin matching consistently. That is why disciplined people often seem calmer. Not because life became easier, because internal conflict decreased. If this audiobook spoke to something deep inside you, let this be your moment of honesty. Not hype, not temporary motivation, a real decision. A decision about the kind of person you are becoming privately. Because private identity always becomes public reality eventually. Always. And if one line from this audiobook stayed with you, if one chapter forced you to confront yourself honestly, write it in the comments. Not for attention, for accountability. Because words repeated publicly can become commitments internally. And if you know someone trapped in distraction, emotional chaos, self-doubt, or lack of direction, share this audiobook with them. Sometimes, one perspective changes an entire trajectory. And if you want more audiobooks like this, more deep journeys into discipline, emotional intelligence, focus, self-mastery, wealth psychology, and inner transformation, subscribe and stay connected to this movement. Not a movement about looking successful, a movement about becoming unshakable, quietly, patiently, powerfully, because in the end, the people who truly change their lives are usually not the loudest. They are the ones who made a private decision one ordinary day and never looked back. The rich think differently when nobody is watching because they understand something the world forgets. Your future is built in the invisible moments no one applauds.